Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Wrap. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, today joined by Herman Pretorius. Today we're going to be talking about an incident of school capture. We're going to be talking about property rights. We're going to be talking about some internal ANC friction. So let's start with our first story. Those of you who followed this show and indeed follow the news will know about the supposed racism incident at Pretoria Girls High that happened some time ago, in which a number of girls were accused of running a whites-only WhatsApp group at the school and making racist remarks. However, upon closer inspection of these remarks and the said WhatsApp group, this was not true at all. And after a sort of attempted witch hunt by the Department of Education in Gauteng, as well, or the Provincial Department of Education in Gauteng, and attempts to sort of bully the students out, the students were found not guilty of racism. And in fact, this incident even provoked former President Thabo Mbeki to come out off the sidelines, engage in this debate, and say that Premier Lesufi and his provincial department in Gauteng had erred and were looking for racism that did not exist, coming to the defense of the girls, which I think was somewhat unexpected, but a rather powerful rebuke in this 13-page letter that former President Mbeki wrote. Well, Lesufi and the department were not willing to let things lie. He said that there would be an investigation into some sort of ill-defined culture of racism based off of a lot of social media accusations about the goings-on at the school. And as written about by a member of the Institute of Race Relations Council, Richard Wilkinson, he's also an activist and author. Richard Wilkinson, he details basically the attempts to investigate the school and how that process was followed. You can read more about that in detail at schoolcapture.com. But let me just kind of summarize some of it here. This investigation is launched into the conduct of the principal and the school governing board. And eventually it comes out to find that indeed the principal did nothing wrong because no racist incident occurred, and therefore she could not be held guilty for not enforcing the school's code of conduct. However, the investigation seems to have dug up some very spurious charges to attack the principal of Pretoria Girls High, Mrs. Erasmus, claiming that she had failed to properly advertise the position of a financial officer for the school, a position that she does not in fact fill. That's the responsibility of the school governing board, and which she and the school governing board both contest they did advertise properly for. She was also sanctioned because apparently she had created the impression of nepotism by allowing her husband, who ran a gardening company, for free to maintain rose bushes on the campus of the school. And also there was some details involving the use of a school car. She's found guilty of this maladministration, and the sanction was, which was announced this week, that Mrs. Erasmus will be suspended without pay for 3 months. Now, as far as sanctions go, it could be a lot worse. She could have been fired. She could have been suspended for a longer period of time, all that sort of thing. But when you consider the fact that in South Africa, we have incidents where you have, for example, even police officers found guilty of internal disciplinary proceedings, as we talked about on the show, I think it was last month, who sometimes don't even get suspended. They can just be moved to a different unit. The fact that this principal was suspended by the department really, I think, reveals its bias and the desire, it seems here, to force her out. So I'm skipping over a lot of details because the story is even worse than I've just described it here. But, Herman, I think this is why we were so opposed to legislation like the Bella Bill. When politicians decide they have an axe to grind and they want to enforce ideological control of a school or something, the more power you give them to do that, the more unjustly they can act.
Absolutely. And what is so tragic about this entire situation, what just exposes the venom, the pettiness of how the Gauteng government is treating this situation, is that this school is one of the exceptional schools in Pretoria. There are really, really good schools in Pretoria, Girls High being one of them. It's a school with a proud history, an impressive academic track record in terms of culture and sport. Really, just one of those schools that you need more of in the country. Whatever is going on at the school is supposed to be duplicated across the country to mirror excellence, to mirror an environment where you can actually get constructive learning. And at the same time, we don't hear that there's a parental interest or a pupil interest behind this witch hunt. This isn't a crusade against a failing school or a failing headmistress or lax standards or dropping standards, or it has nothing to do with whether the school is performing well or not. It has nothing to do whether the interests of pupils are served or not. It has nothing to do with whether parents are displeased with what's going on at the school. It is purely political, petty venom. And this is a long-running theme for Panyaza Lesufi, a particularly loathsome and venomous individual. This is the same school that about a decade ago became a sort of a hot button topic in terms of alleged racism over hairstyles in that for African kids or black kids with African hairstyles and hair. And that issue, as loaded as it was and as toxic as Lesufi made it at the time, was actually solved by the school, the governing body of it, with some sensitivity and, I think, compassion and concessions that I would not have made. But it was a good faith attempt to address those ills. Now, this is clearly a lingering vendetta for Panyaza Lesufi, that he has unfinished business with this school. And it betrays how dangerous, exactly as you say, the Bella Act is, in that it changes fundamentally and it entrenches fundamentally what is and isn't important in a school. Instead of having a schooling system, a public education system and private, focused on delivering results, actually upskilling pupils, making sure that they're ready for constructive participation in the society and in the economy, you have a law that just goes way overboard in terms of destroying whatever parental choice and independence there might have been left in these schools. It is the most aggressive centralization of education policy that I've ever seen, and I've looked at quite a few. It criminalizes not sending your child to preschool, to grade R. It actually creates the possibility of a penal sentence falling on a parent. And it just allows this sort of ideology that politicians know best, and that it doesn't matter if a school is performing, it doesn't matter what's going on in the school, it matters what the politicians want and what the state wants and what the government wants, irrespective of the interests of the pupils or the parents. And it is just so infuriating that we deal here with something that is frankly an embarrassment. When you look at South Africa's education system, especially state schools, it is a global embarrassment. The return on investment we have for what is spent in these schools compared to literacy and numeracy rates the world over is a shame. Like it is truly
What is it? Education is either the biggest or second biggest budget item. I think it competes with the interest we pay on our debt in terms of government spending.
Yes, and we get disgraceful results for it. And instead of looking at operational schools, good schools, schools like Pretoria High School for Girls, and figuring out how can we give more South African kids this experience. We've got venomous individuals like Panyaza Lesufi just driving agendas, driving toxic political, ideological, and race-based agendas to the detriment, sadly, of the pupils involved. So all strength to Richard Wilkinson, all strength to the Free Speech Union, and genuinely may there be damning consequences for Panyaza Lesufi and his government in treating quite clearly someone of integrity and capability with such disdain and humiliating Mrs. Erasmus in this sense. And frankly, I hope this is the beginning of an accountability process for this type of disgusting behavior that truly comes back to bite the drivers of this toxicity properly in the arse.
So the last thing on this is that Richard Wilkinson and our former colleague Sarah Gon, who's still a fellow of the Institute, have set up a crowdfunding campaign to support Mrs. Erasmus and also other particular incidents where there might be this kind of persecution of good performing school officials who are not aligned with the state and therefore are being sort of driven out. Like I said, the website for that is school-capture.com, and you can read Richard Wilkinson's stuff there. Quite interesting stuff. He's been documenting all of these cases. Okay, let's go now to some comments by the Minister of Human Settlements, Thembi Semelane, who was quoted as saying, "In which country would you allow a person to sell a house that he or she has not built? It means you have means." She says that she wants her department to review the ability of people with RDP houses, that is, houses provided originally by the state, to sell their houses. So in other words, you could be potentially an owner of an RDP house on paper, but the state will prevent you from being allowed to actually sell that property if you wish to, which means that you will effectively not be the owner of that property. And Herman, to me, this speaks to the kind of most condescending, controlling, patronizing version of our government. It's the belief that we cannot trust people to do with property, to be responsible with property. We say, oh no, they can't be allowed to sell their RDP houses because then they'll sell it to foreigners or whatever. That's often the sort of undercurrent of this discussion. And as far as I'm concerned, it's outrageous, and it depresses people's economic opportunities because it essentially robs them of a sellable asset. What's your take on this?
Absolutely. And this is something that I've been talking about it a lot this year, is that property rights is the thing that enables you to trade and be economically active and participate. If you can't own something, if you don't have an asset, you can't leverage that asset to your own benefit. Now, someone who owns a home doesn't just have four walls and a roof over their head. It's not just a place to live and die. It is actually an asset that you can use as security, for credit, to start a business, to send a kid to college, to university. It is a stepping stone to using what you own, what you have, to gain more, to build wealth. My parents, being sort of the generation they are, have throughout their lives used their home to, every month, of course, they would pay off their mortgage. But sometimes when you're under economic pressure and you perhaps have a big expense, having a home loan allows you to then take some of that money back and plug the gap you have in your immediate personal finances. So it's not only just an asset in terms of big investments. Sometimes it's the difference between a middle-class family getting through a tough period or not. It's the difference between actually having that buffer to maintain a middle-class existence and falling out of it. So to own your home isn't just, do you have a place to sleep? And do you have a place to hide away from the elements? It is to be able to leverage that for personal, economic, and social upliftment. And for Minister Similane to have this disgustingly condescending idea of, no, of course you can't sell what's yours, and that one listens to the interview and you get this idea that it really is just the state must provide shelter for everyone. We can't trust them to do it themselves because they might sell the shelter. They might transform what should be a non-asset thing into an asset, and we can't allow that. It is the exact mentality that prevented David Rakgase from buying the farm he had been working on and renting for 20 years. It's the philosophy that drove him to an almost 2-decade court battle to be able to own property. It's the philosophy that prevents choice being imbued as something noble for poor people to have the freedom to exercise. And when I first read this sentence that the Human Settlements Minister says the government wants to review its policy on the reselling of RDP houses by beneficiaries, my first instinct was, this is wonderful. Perhaps they actually want to make it easier to sell these houses. Perhaps they want to stop giving people just places to live and die and actually give them economic assets, something that you could use to climb up the upliftment ladder. How depressing it was for me to find out, no, it's the opposite. The 8 years that you cannot sell your RDP house, followed after which you can only sell it to the government on first option basis. No, that isn't restrictive enough on what poor Black South Africans can do with what should be an asset. No, we need to restrict their consumer choice, their buying power, their upward socioeconomic mobility even more, says Minister Similane. It's just, condescending is exactly the right word, but it is condescending in the most depressing way. It really is a parody of what the elites think of ordinary people is, do not trust them with anything because they might not actually do the socialist national democratic revolutionary thing of being a good little comrade.
It's actually even worse than that. I've heard of incidents where MPs from the ANC and MK and EFF have argued, for example, that people who get empowerment shares through BE deals should not be allowed to sell them unless it's to another BE beneficiary, in other words, to another Black South African, because they can't be trusted to sell them, to deal with the shares themselves. They'll spend the money badly. And so it's this almost sort of, for a party that kind of claims to be the voice of the Black majority and the ones to fighting against racism, it quite often has this bizarre racist dynamic against Black South Africans. It's sort of like, capitalism is a thing that only white people are allowed to participate in, but it's communism for Black South Africans. And this is not only sort of bizarre and racist, but also just crippling to the economic opportunities of millions of people in this country. And it comes often from the ANC, EFF, MK stable.
And it comes from their ideology. They have this, I think the term, I can't remember exactly, but I think it's called lumpen. To be a lumpen is to be a worker with middle-class aspirations. You are someone in the working class who wants the bourgeois experience of being middle class. And you read ANC documentation where they talk about their strategy and their ideology and their history and their beliefs, and they use this terminology with such hatred of Black South Africans who are poor, who don't romanticize being of the working class, who aspire to be a member of the middle class, who want to own property, who want to build intergenerational wealth for their families. And you read this documentation, you just get this idea that this is an ideological disdain for socioeconomic aspiration, particularly when it comes from Black people. If it comes from white people, it's just capitalist whites being capitalist whites. But when a Black South African from a poor background wants to progress, aspire, own property, open a business, indulge in the evils of capitalism, like, I don't know, healthcare of a certain quality, life of a certain quality, the disdain the ANC has for these people on their own, in their own documentation, on their own choice of words, is quite astonishing. And I think people should go look at that and just appreciate that this isn't the pragmatic ANC of Mbeki or Trevor Manuel. This is an ANC with a deep-seated and long-lasting hatred of the idea of a Black person being able to choose, because they might not choose the ANC.
Yeah, no, well said. All right, let's very briefly, quickly go to our last story today. And this is from Buffalo City, or that is the municipality around East London, where there's been a curious incident, and this is not the first time we've seen this kind of thing happening, of internal discord within the ANC. An ANC councillor, Pearl Hanse, has tabled a motion of no confidence against the mayor, Princess Faku. However, the motion was not allowed to proceed because it was not put on the order paper before time, so the speaker struck it down. This ANC councillor trying to get rid of the ANC mayor was supported by recently reshuffled MMC and another ANC councillor. So, it's not clear whether the sort of ANC rebels have the numbers to overthrow their own mayor, but this has caused Fikile Mbalula to get very upset. Understandably, being the Secretary General of the ANC, he's demanded a report on the ill discipline by the end of today to find out what exactly happened here. But Herman, I think it's quite interesting. The ANC councillor who was opposing her own mayor was tabling the motion of no confidence due to a prolonged water shortage in the municipality, deplorable road conditions, and collapsed infrastructure projects under the mayor's leadership. We've seen this kind of thing happen before. I think it was in Rustenburg, where some ANC councillors voted with the DA to appoint a DA mayor for a short period of time in that municipality. But it does seem to be another sign of the ANC just really struggling to hold itself together.
And this actually goes further back than just this. I remember Annette Kombrink. This is probably 10 years ago, 12, possibly 11-ish, 12 years ago. Annette Kombrink was elected mayor of Tlokwe or Potchefstroom municipality, but in a similar circumstance, because there were these cracks within the ANC and so on. And what stood out to me about this is that this is truly a party in terminal decline. This is a party where factionalism has, rather than becoming sort of exceptional, has become so ordinary. And it is a party that is breaking down and starting to burst at the seams. I've been talking about the election campaign in marketing my book over the last few weeks. And one of the most amazing stories about last year's election campaign was the extent to which the ANC never figured out how to counter the MK threat. And the MK threat is a very clear and blatant and crass manifestation of the type of factionalism that will destroy the ANC within the next decade. The patronage networks are collapsing, so party unity is collapsing. And to the good people still left in the ANC, who believe in the ANC's ability to deliver for the people of South Africa, you are stuck in a system that is dragging you down. So let's give this councillor the benefit of the doubt and say the reasons given aren't just weaponizing failures for personal political ends. Let's say they genuinely do believe that this mayor, with a name that borders on the obscene, if we see those complaints as valid and not just cynical, we should feel pity for the remaining handful of ANC councillors that can see this party collapsing, losing the credibility, the patronage networks collapsing, the service delivery collapsing. And Davy Scholz, the sort of pollster analyst guy on who writes for News 24 and is quite worth a follow on X, he made this point that ANC by-election performance is on track with ANC at 30%. That is exactly where the IRR polled the ANC a few months ago. And if you sort of check the internals from the DA and some Social Research Foundation IRR polling, we are really in the territory of the 2026 7 local government elections being a two-horse race for between a DA possibly on 30% and an ANC as low as 30%. We are solidly in that territory, and this sort of collapse, if it continues, will ensure that that territory becomes the new country in which we vote and wonder about what comes next.
Indeed. I think obviously, you never want to prognosticate too strongly before the time, but I agree completely that is the way that the symptoms are looking towards. So we are looking at a weak ANC going into the next local government elections, and very little sign that there's going to be any ability to turn that around. And so this is, I think, going to be the next big shock to our politics. Is the ANC has a disastrous next local government election. What are the political consequences of that within the ANC, within the DA, within MK, all these other parties? It's going to be, I think, quite a thunderclap to the whole system when it happens, and possibly even a bigger thunderclap in some ways than what happened in 2024.
Absolutely, and perhaps this is a point we should explore at a different time in a different show. But it is worth comparing how the DA responded to the 2019 election setback. One election loss was enough to shock the party into a desperate scramble for survival. Whether they did it right, whether they made the right decisions, we're not commenting on that. But one bad election result of going
right, there was an immediate response.
Yes, an immediate response, an investigation into the leadership, a clean house, or a clean out at the top of the house, sort of drastic action, and action that seems to have stabilized the party. How incredible is it that the ANC can look at 20 years of declining results and even threatening to dip as low as 30%, more than half of what they had 20 years ago, and still they seem unable to find the handbrake to pull on this institution. It's astonishing. I think we shouldn't prognosticate over early, but it is worrying from an institutional level that there seems to be no corrective for the ANC.
Yeah. Now that has been the thing to me that keeps sort of, and maybe it just speaks to my own naivete, but the inability for an organization that does seem to be facing a kind of existential crisis to just make so little change whatsoever. I mean, even tripling down and becoming even more EFF than the EFF, which is a road they could take, or trying to mirror ZANU-PF. The ANC is not even doing that. They're just sort of plodding along like a dinosaur in the same direction they've been going for decades. It is kind of amazing to watch, especially because everyone in the ANC knows that there's a problem. They all say there's a problem, and they all say that something needs to change, but no one can do it. It is, from a purely sort of scientific point of view, a fascinating thing. Unfortunately, it's ordinary South Africans who bear the consequence of this sort of plodding into destruction approach, which our government has taken. But anyway, all right, we're very much over time here. We went long, but I hope it was interesting enough to justify the length. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. We hope you found the show interesting. That's a wrap.
The Daily Friend Show and The Daily Friend are a project of the Institute of Race Relations, the IRR. The IRR is a think tank which was founded in 1929 to study race relations in South Africa and works to change government policy to improve race relations through non-racialism and to ensure the prosperity of all South Africans. If you like our work and would like to support us, please go to irr.org.za and click Support the IRR, or you can go to thedailyfriend.co